Hello and welcome to today's webinar from Valto, which is all about mastering document control with SharePoint. Could you go to the next slide for me, please, Samantha? So today we're going to be talking a bit about our pre-built solution that is using SharePoint to address some of the common issues that people have when it comes to document control. Typically, this is around things like version control, reviews and approval processes, and having a centralized place that people can find documents easily. We've also got the ability to track who's actually read certain policies and procedures. At the end of the session, we are going to have a Q&A. So there is a questions box at the top of your screen that you can type any questions into. Do that throughout the session, and we'll come at the end to actually answer those questions for you. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Samantha, who's going to walk us through our SharePoint demo.
Thanks, Dougie. So this is what we like to call our SharePoint control documents out of the box system. As Dougie explained, it allows you to internally manage your policies and your procedures. It does sit on your SharePoint intranet platform. It sits on your SharePoint tenant, but it will sit in an area called applications. The reason for that is it's technically its very own separate site, hence why it comes with its own homepage, which I'll go through in just a second. So therefore, it sits in the application section as a separate entity. On the homepage, here at Valto, we like to keep everything very clean, very smooth and very simple. So we build all of our sites from the perspective of a new starter. So if there was someone new joining the organisation, they'd be able to navigate themselves around this system with ease and without much assistance. The first section of the homepage you will notice is the theme and the branding. So for demo purposes, the company in question is Holler. We can work with you to determine your theming and your branding and your logos so you can get the look and the feel that you desire for your organisation. The first section I'm going to talk about is this top section of the homepage. This is what we like to call a high traffic area. So it's most used areas within the control doc system. So this massive tile here, as you can see, is all of the documents because that will be the most used area. You've got your ISO accredited documents section up here, your document tracker, as Dougie said in the introduction. We do have the ability to track documents, and you've got any expired documents here as well for archive purposes. You can have this look and feel as you like. It doesn't have to be laid out this way. You can lay it out as you wish. Scrolling down into the middle, as you know with SharePoint, you have three areas of SharePoint. You have your admin area, your champion users, and you also have your end users. Your admin users necessarily have full access to permissions and the site to make any amendments and changes. If you are an admin, you can have a section on your homepage that only admins are able to view and see. It's just some quick links to enable you to access certain areas of the admin section with ease. For example, you've got any documents awaiting your action specifically, any documents that are close to being reviewed, any pending documents, and any pending documents that are waiting for approval. So you can access them quite quickly from this section rather than filtering through the all documents area. Scrolling down on the homepage, it might be that you would like to have a section here with the most popular documents, so most viewed documents for the business. You can add that down the bottom there as well. Again, it's optional, it's not a necessity. You can have it look and feel as simple or as busy as you like. So just scrolling back to the very top of the homepage, if I was to click into the all documents section, this is where essentially the magic happens. This is where all of your documentation will sit. For demo purposes, I am viewing this site from an admin perspective. The reason I say that is I can currently see all draft, pending and approved versions. If you as an end user just navigating your way through the site, you will only be able to see any approved versions. Starting from the very beginning, as you can see, on the left-hand side, you have all of your internal policies here. Now, with your policies, you can have them laid out as a list, just like this list here. Or if you prefer and you hold quite a lot of policies, you can add folders in here. And in those folders, you can store specific documents. It might be that you have a folder per department or per permissions. So you can lean on your permissions to lock down specific folders and hide them away from people you don't want to see.
I think that's a really good point, actually. It's a very common question that we get asked is around locking down documents for different people have a different experience of this. Now, this whole system is built using native out-of-the-box SharePoint. So you can use all the same features that you know and love of SharePoint, like folders, folder permissions, things like that. So it's a great way, as Sam, you're saying, to have departmental-based folders and things like that. So if you actually want to have a slightly different experience or different documents that appear to different people, that's a really good way to achieve that.
It is a really good way to achieve it. It's also a really good way of filtering through the documents, just so you can see the wood through the trees. If you do have a lot of documents, if you're a larger organisation, it's a really way to keep control of them and manage them. Another really good way of managing them as well, as you can see on the very top line, you can filter through each section. So for example, you can filter through departments. So if I did only want to see, if I was in the HR department, for example, and I only wanted to see documents relating to HR, I can filter that to HR, apply that filter, and then I can just see documents relating to HR, which is another way of tidying it up if you didn't want to put them in folders as well. So moving on to how you would like to input your documents and how you want to store them in here, we have our approval status and our version control. The version control is a very popular reason as to why customers like this system as well as the Power Automation. Purely because if you have ISO accreditations and you're trying to maintain those, or you're looking to achieve ISO accreditations, the version control allows you to have a full footprint archive of any drafts and any amendments that have ever been made. So I'll just quickly walk you through the version control and how that works. So as you can see, as I said earlier, I am looking at this system from an admin point of view. So I can see any draft, any pending, and any approved versions currently on the system. If it is a draft or a pending version, they are classed as minor version numbers. So as you can see here, this one is in draft, the complaints policy, and it's currently at version 6.1. Each time someone has accessed this document and made a change and saved the document, that version number will increase 0.1, and it will keep increasing until it reaches approval status. If it is an approved document, it will always be a major number, so it will always be a whole number. For example, this approved version is 3.0. So if this complaints policy was to be approved now at 6.1, that will automatically jump to 7.0. That's how the version control works. To enable you to see the version history and the footprint that that document has had, you can highlight the document just like I have here, right click on that, scroll down to version history, and as you can see, I can now see the full footprint of this specific document. This is really, really popular for auditing purposes as well. So it can give you different levels of information on the version history. So as you can see on 6.1, it's telling me the approval status at the moment. That's currently in draft. 6.0, it's telling me the approval status at that point, and it's also telling me the review date for it. If I scroll down to the bottom here, there's quite a lot of information under this 0.1 document. So you've got your approval status at that point, the approval date, the review period, the reviewer at that point, the approver, whether that document is a trackable document, and whether that document is a key document as well. So it's very, very helpful and very informative. If there was a document on there that piqued your interest and you wanted to look into that a little bit more further, into a bit more detail, that is also possible. So if I had a discrepancy or I wanted to have a look at 4.1, for example, if you hover over the date and time, you can click the little arrow on the right hand side. You are able to view that document at the state it was in at that point. You can restore it back into the library. If you wanted to restore it, you can rename that document, for example, complaints policy point 1, point 2, however you want to name that, and it will not override the current version that's published. You are able to completely remove that footprint as well, if you would like.
I think one thing about version control that I really like is the fact that the major versions, so you can hide minor versions from just readers. So
Yeah.
like what Sam was talking about before, there's different levels to this. There's different types of access that you have. You could be an admin of the system and see every version of the document, or you could just be a consumer, a reader of the system. So you're going there and and all you're tasked with is to read the latest policy document, or maybe you want to go and read the latest leave request policy or whatever it is. Now, as a end user, as just a reader, you can go to the system and you'll only see the major versions. You'll never see the draft minor versions. Even if people are working on it at that current point in time, you'll only ever see the published major versions. And to me, I think that's really useful because it means you don't have to kind of keep track of where your published documents live and where your sort of draft documents live. They live in the same place. It's just different people have different view of that document. I've worked with organizations which have to do things like having a central area somewhere for all of their published documents, and then another area that they have to work on the documents, and then they have to actually go and physically sort of move the document from point A to point B. Whereas actually once the documents are in this controlled document system, they never leave. And all these kind of versions that we're talking about, every time you make an edit or a change, it's logging it all inside of this list. So if you're going for an audit or you have an auditor that's going to look at these documents, it makes their life so much easier. And for you, you're going to save money because it's not going to take as long for an auditor to look at this because everything is in one place. So to me, the version control of this is really important.
I completely agree, Dougie. I really do. And like you say, some people purchase separate softwares to manage this type of version control. So essentially you're paying for extras, even though really if you hold a Microsoft license, it's all there for you, included in your license. It's just a case of having a system like this to make use of that. Also, some organizations that I've come across of recent employ people and pay people an actual salary to manage. So that's their full-time job, is to purely manage through Excel spreadsheets and things like that, the version control, and it can be wild. So having something like this completely mitigates that factor, which can be really good.
I would go one step further. I've worked with organisations in the past before which have got physical pieces of paper which they have in an office, which keeps track of who changed the document, when they changed it, what was changed about it, and things like that. And really, it's quite an archaic way of working. This is totally going to digitally transform that whole process for anyone who's kind of still working in that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. As well as obviously having a look at the version history here, you can also see in this middle section here who that document was modified by at that time. So if you had any questions about that document, you can go and speak to whoever modified it at that time. So it's very informative. You are able to add comments as well. You can say things like, this is who asked me to make this change, this is why the change was made, and this is what I did to change this document. So it can be really helpful. So just coming out of the version control section now, we're moving over to the middle area. So you've got your department section. I did touch on that slightly at the start. The department section is quite important because not all documents relate to everybody. Some documents relate to specific departments in the business. So as you can see, you've got a complaints policy and a data breach notification policy there, which are tagged to IT. You can double tag and stack departments on here. So it doesn't have to be just one department, you can stack them. It's really good for filtering as well, like I touched on earlier. So like I showed you before, you can filter by what documents you would like to see, which can just make things a little bit easier for you when you're looking at having a browse through the documents relating to yourself. Now, the back end of this list here, so from review date down to tracker group, this is where the Power Automation kicks in. So this is where it takes flow. So you've got your review date section here in the middle. You've got your review period and your reviewer. Now, they all kind of tie together. So we work with you when you're inputting the metadata into the control document system to determine what review periods you would like against the documents. It could be 24 months, 6 months, 12 months, quarterly, like you've got one here, however you see fit and however you want them to look. So what will happen is the review date in this area here right now on the complaints policy is the 30th of the 5th, 2024. As you can see, that is in the past for demo purposes, so it is in red. What will happen in this area is Joe Bloggs, who is currently our reviewer in this section, will be automatically notified via email 30 days before this review date to prompt him that this document is due to be reviewed. He will then be continually notified until he actions that. And again, we can work with you to determine whether you want that action to take place every 7 days, every 14. That's up to yourself. Once Joe has made the necessary amendments and that review date has passed, because we've worked with you on the review periods, that review date will automatically change. So it will then go from the 30th of the 5th, 2024 to the 30th of the 5th, 2026. So there is nothing manual you need to do. You don't need to come into the system and change the dates. It's all done for you automatically.
I think this is another real game changer for the way that people work with control documents, because again, a lot of manual processes rely on having spreadsheets or reminders and calendars and things like that to go and check documents. Whereas with this, not only have you got that kind of RAG status we can see there, where there's things which are going red or amber as they're kind of needing to be looked at, you're also getting automatic chases. You're getting emails sent to you to say this document needs to be updated, needs to be reviewed and things like that. So it's not just down to the document controller, whoever's responsible for these documents, to go and chase. The system's going to be doing chasing on your behalf as well. So it takes that kind of manual process, automates it, and again, it's part of this digital transformational piece that is really going to save a lot of time, effort, and potential for things to be forgotten as well. Because depending on how strict your kind of processes are at the moment, there's potential that you could completely forget about a document for it to be reviewed. So having this as a kind of safety net is just one extra kind of way to make sure that those documents are reviewed when they need to be.
Totally, completely agree. Again, we've had people reach out to us purely for that reason. They want the control documents system for that, just so the Power Automation takes away that element of stress, really. So people aren't forgetting documents, they aren't forgetting to make them changes and review them. Again, especially if you are trying to achieve ISO accreditations or you're trying to maintain them. So yeah, it can be really good.
It's a really good point you actually mentioned there in passing, that this is built using Power Automate. So there's no kind of custom code which is going on in the background of this system. It's all using Microsoft best recommended standards. We've built this as a kind of template, as a building blocks, using SharePoint lists, libraries, and Power Automate as the workflow tool, which does all the reviews, the approval processes, the chases, the notifications. It's all built with Power Automate. So it's everything you need into one place. And actually, when we plug into technical, when we deploy it, it's all inside of your environment as well. So you own it. So once you have this solution, it's inside of your environment. You have it. All the data is inside of your environment. So yeah, it's basically following the recommended standards, and there's nothing that's going to break if Microsoft was to release a new update to SharePoint, for example.
Exactly, and there's no scary subscriptions either on the back of it. It's not something you have to pay monthly for, or quarterly or annually. It belongs to you. It is yours, and obviously you could then have the admin rights to make a couple of tweaks and changes. If you decide to have a change of logo as a business, it should be fairly easy for you to amend that in the
Yeah.
system in this section. So
I think that's
yeah.
the other thing, just going back to the kind of point about the control documents kind of landing page. It's all built using native SharePoint. So those buttons that Sam was going through earlier, you don't even have to have those buttons. If you didn't want them, you can configure the page to work how you want it to work. So some people like having that kind of interface for people to go through and look through it. Some people like to have a navigation that comes from their intranet homepage to go to very specific areas of control documents and don't even bother with the homepage of control documents. There's loads of ways that this could be approached. As I say, because it's using SharePoint natively, it's configurable and it's easy to use.
Definitely, I agree. So that doesn't stop there with the Power Automation, believe it or not, it keeps going. So you've got your, next to your review date here, you've got your approval date. So in here, that will state the last approval date for that document. So for this complaints policy at the moment, the last approval date for that was the 1st of the 1st, 2022. Moving on, you've got your approver. So your approver in this area is the person who will approve the document for it to be pushed out for people to sign. So once Joe Bloggs, who is our reviewer on this complaints policy, has made all his relevant changes, he's very happy with everything. If I just click on this complaints policy here, if you look on the white ribbon at the top, there is a section that says submit for approval. Joe can then click on that once he's ready. That document will then automatically be pushed out to Steve, who is our approver on this document. Steve will then receive an email to say that this document has been reviewed, changes have been made, it's ready for your action now, basically. Steve can then go into that document, have a look at what changes have been made. If he's happy with it, brilliant, he can approve it and push it out to everybody. If he isn't, and there's still a couple of amendments that need to be made, he can automatically push that back to Joe. So there's no kind of opening documents, making changes, saving them emailing them over to people and waiting all that time, or trying to get a meeting with somebody in the same room at the same time. Everybody's so busy. It's all automatically done for you. So if Steve is actually happy and he's approved that document, this tracker group down here will determine who that document is going to be pushed out to. So your tracker groups here, you've got all sales team, all staff, that can be anybody. It can be just for HR, just for finance, you determine that. If you would like that document to be tracked, if it's an important policy and procedure and you want to be looking at who's read that document and who hasn't read that document, then you are able to click a button that ticks it, and that will automate the process to say this document is being tracked. So you will be notified when people are looking at it. The way to track the documents is if you look on the blue ribbon at the top, there is a document tracker. Now you're able to track documents one of three ways. So you can group it by user. As you can see, you've got the user and all the documents that have been pushed out to them and if they've read it or not. You can group it by policy. So if you're just interested in who's reading a specific policy, you can group it that way. Or you can group it by who's read what and who hasn't. Just for the purpose of the demo today, I'm going to group by policy because we've been looking at the complaints policy today as an example. So as you can see here, the complaints policy has been pushed out to these 5 people. Joe, Paul and Karen have all read that document. That's brilliant. Whereas Steve and Toby haven't yet read that document. So what will now happen is Steve and Toby will continuously be notified via email. The email will come from Flow, which is Power Automate. And in that email, they will have a link to the document specifically, so they don't even need to come into this site. They can click on the link, read the document. Once they've read that document, there will be a button on the email body itself, which they have to physically click on to say that they've read that document, just to ensure that people are actually reading the documents. Once they have done that, their name will automatically change from no to yes, and it will also date stamp when they did that as well. So then they will stop being notified by Power Automation Flow, and they'll stop receiving those notifications to action. And that is how you track a document.
So to me, again, this is another massive feature of the system, because I've worked with a lot of organizations. In fact, recently worked with quite a large sort of facilities management company, and they had to track all of the kind of policies of who's actually read the policies. So things like working at heights policies, or working with hazardous chemicals and things like that. And they had to physically get someone else to travel out onto site with this giant logbook of the different types of policies and things like that, and physically get a signature from everybody that works at that company. And that was not only was that a really long process, it also meant that they were working in a paper way, that all of their policies were being printed off. And it meant once a year they were printing off hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper and sending them out onto sites and things like that. Whereas by implementing this process, it means that they can access the policies digitally. So they can have a device, and typically you could just have one device on site that people access through, but it's still, or if you wanted to have like a bring your own device type of policy internally, where you open this up so people can use it on their mobile phones, on their iPads, tablets, things like that. They can access it, and they can use this control document system to not only get access and read the policies, but also confirm that they've read it as well.
Yeah.
It's worth mentioning that also you can have different tracker groups dependent on things like department or office location or things like that. So you could have a grouping. Say let's go back to facilities management. There's probably totally different policies that you want your cleaners to confirm that they've read, as in hazardous chemicals and things like that, compared to your security guards and things like that. So what you can do is you can have different groups. You can have a group called cleaners, and you can have a group called security, and then you can assign different policies that you want these employees to confirm that they've read to those groups, and it'll go to them in different ways. That gives you a couple of things. So using that list that Sam's showing you, it gives you two things. One is that you can quickly track who hasn't read a policy. Now, again, going back to that example I was talking about, someone had literally a mound of papers. It'd be really difficult to go through all of that and figure out that Joe Bloggs hasn't read these particular policies, because without going through and looking for his name, it's near impossible. So this list means that you could literally filter by someone's name and to say, have they read these policies or not? Or filter by read equals no, as in like show me everyone who's not read policies, and you can drill down into that data. You can also export that data into Excel. So if you wanted to do any sort of analysis on it, to look at, say, how many policies are read per department or things like that, you can export the data really easily to Excel. You can also connect things like Power BI to this list as well, so if that's more advanced reporting, if you wanted to do things like that. So you can take that kind of analysis step even further with those types of things. The other thing that this list will give you is that, let's say, for example, a common one that I show when I look at this system is the data protection policy. And let's say, for example, there was ever a data breach inside of your organization, and then you found out it was Joe Bloggs that breached the data. If you go into this list and you can confirm, look, I can see Joe Bloggs has confirmed at this date and at this time he read our data protection policy, it means you've got a little bit more kind of in the bank, that if you pull him into a disciplinary meeting, you can say, look, Joe Bloggs, you should know better because you confirmed you read our data protection policy at this date and at this time. So it gives you that kind of comfort blanket, so to speak, that you've got a little bit of backup there. So just while Sam, if you want to transition back to the PowerPoint.
Of course, yeah.
So unless you had anything else you wanted to mention, sorry, I should have.
No, not really. The only thing I wanted to touch on actually very quickly is the search function at the top.
Yeah.
So you are able to search using this search function through the control document site. So this search bar at the top relates to this. So if you wanted to search anything right now, so I wanted to see Joe Blogs, for example, see if it's a demo site. So it should come up with anything in relate to Joe Blogs. If you go into the document section and I clicked complaints policy, and I just clicked enter there, it will bring up results with anything around the complaints policy. So again, it is searchable physically as well as filtering through things. So I just wanted to touch on that as well.
Cool. So one of the other final things I wanted to just mention as well about this system, because it's a buzzword at the moment, is AI. And we're getting a lot of questions about AI and how AI can be used with SharePoint. Now, Microsoft have recently announced that there is going to be what is going to be referred to as Copilot for SharePoint, which basically means that you'll be able to generate a chat interface based on a set of documents that are inside of SharePoint. And it's actually pretty cool from what I've seen so far. You can generate almost like a Copilot link, very much like when you use the sharing button inside of SharePoint, and then you can say who you want to share it with and what level of access you want to give them. It looks very much like that when you create the Copilot, but then it means you can send a link to somebody and they can then use the Copilot interface, like a chat interface, to ask it questions. So we're not that far away from, if you're going down the route of investigating Copilot and using Copilot, we're not far away from Copilot for SharePoint, where you'll be able to apply a Copilot over the top of this control document system so that end users don't have to dig through loads of files and folders and links and things like that to get the information they need. They'll just be able to simply type in something like, I don't know, say, for example, it was a question about leave requests. You could say, how many days leave do I get a year or something like that? And they can look up the leave request policy and pull that information out and say, look, this is the how many days you get a year, and here's the document that I've taken it from. So the answer when people are asking, and that we're talking to people about things like SharePoint control document systems, and they're asking about sort of AI elements of this, it'd be very easy to apply this Copilot. It's known as Copilot Studio, which is what gives you the ability to create your own Copilots. It'd be very easy to apply that over the top of something like this to create that kind of chat interface, which is slowly starting to come down the line. So I think now what we'll do is maybe we'll go to the Q&A slide. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A option. So there's a Q&A option across the top of this webinar, and you can drop some questions in. I can see a few questions are starting to drop in, so I'll go through these now. So first question, and Sam, I'll send this one over to you. How many versions can you keep in the control document system?
So you can actually keep 500 plus versions in the control document system. Each version does use storage, so we do recommend around 200 just for storage purposes.
Yeah, so something that we've seen in the past before, and this isn't just this control document system, it's SharePoint in general, is that if you store a lot of versions of documents in there, and obviously everyone's slightly different about the size of their documents and things like that, so there's no real hard and fast rule. That the 200 we're saying there is just based on our experience of working with people with their policy system and size of documents. But some people have massive documents and loads of them, and some of them not so much. But because SharePoint isn't an endless storage area, you do have a finite amount of storage. And again, it's the kind of question of how long is a piece of string type of thing.
Yes.
You do need to be careful about how many versions you're storing, because think about it, every version that you store it's like its own independent document. So people that set these thresholds of huge things, if you don't actually need to keep track of that many versions, because you're not making hundreds of changes every year, you're probably making tens of changes per document per year, and you only need to go back a handful of years to actually go back and see that, then keep the version numbers down. You can retrospectively go back and change that if you needed to. As in, if you wanted to shrink it down, if you're finding the storage space was getting too big. But yeah, it's something to consider from the beginning. So this question was partially answered earlier, actually, but I'll ask it anyway to you, Sam. But can files be hidden from some users?
Yes, they can. So as we touched on in the demo, you can put certain files in folders, and that way you can rely on your permissions to lock certain folders down and hide them away from certain users if required.
Yeah. And actually, just a question from the audience that I'll answer was, you mentioned adding folders into the library. I thought the main idea of SharePoint is not using folders but categories, i.e. metadata, instead of using different libraries if you need to lock certain documents down. So good question. And this is somewhere that to me, there's no black and white. So I've been working with SharePoint for donkey's years, and you tend to sometimes find people really side with one side of the fence or the other of folders versus metadata. But I think there's a sweet spot, and everyone has to find that sweet spot for themselves. There's a bit of a balancing act, because there's benefits of having folders and there's benefits of having metadata. The benefits of sort of metadata is you can be quite specific with sort of the tagging. It means you can create views, so you can sort of look at documents grouped together in different ways, whereas folders are very linear. You can't have one document that lives in multiple folders, but you can have one document which is tagged with multiple pieces of metadata. Whereas the benefits of folders is that you can apply permissions to them. So you can't apply permissions and control the access purely just based on metadata. With folders, you can also sync them offline. If you were to sync the folders offline, if you were to sync, say, the control documents document library offline, and all you were using was metadata and no folders, you'd just end up with a big pile of documents inside a file explorer with no structure to it at all. So there's a sweet spot that I tend to find when you're building these types of systems. If you need to lock it down, as in different people have different access to different documents, you are going to need folders, but I would suggest that you try and keep the structure as flat as possible in the folders structure, and then use your metadata for the advanced kind of filtering of what type of document is it, different categories, maybe tagging different types of ISO accreditations against it. Things like that would be tags, whereas maybe the department it relates to would be a folder, so you can control the access to it at that level. So a question here for you, Sam. Can we rename it from controlled documents to something else?
Absolutely. As you probably know, with SharePoint, it's extremely customizable. You can call it whatever you like. You can call it company documents. You can call it QMS. Some people call it QMS. Some people also just call it policies. So yeah, you can name it whatever suits.
So a couple of questions here that I'll answer from the audience. So does anything get added to the document itself, versions, and what has been changed? So a couple of two-part answer here. So the version history that Sam was showing before is at the kind of the SharePoint layer. So at that layer, you can kind of see at a high level what's been changed. If you were to go into the document, it's actually, rather than a SharePoint feature, it's a feature of, say, Word Online. You can go into the version history there, and it's a lot more granular in terms of you can go back and click, and you can see what's been changed to the document, and it'll highlight things. It puts like a little flashing beacon next to things that have been changed and things like that. So actually, a feature of Word Online is that you can see that in a lot more detail. And the second part of the question, what we can do as well, some people also like to include the version number inside of the document. Now, we can achieve that using Power Automate as well. So it's something that I believe is an additional extra to this system that we're looking at today, but we can add additional bolt-on to use Power Automate. The reason why it's additional bolt-on is I think it does require a premium Power Automate license to achieve it. So it's something that's slightly outside of this system, but we can achieve it. It's not it's not too difficult to do. So we can get that version number that's in SharePoint and inject it into the document. Now, the reason why we don't tend to do that all that often is the version number inside of the document really is only important if you're planning on printing it off, because that way you know that that policy or that procedure was a certain version at that point in time. And ideally, we want to be working in a way that you're not necessarily printing off documents anymore. But if you really need to, we can have that conversation and we can get that working for you as well. Cool, so that is that. Another question here from Julie. Is there a limitation to the retention period on how long you could hold documents for? So that's quite a good question. Now, what we were talking about before was more related to version numbers of how many versions that we keep. Whereas with a retention period, it's something slightly different. We can create what are referred to as retention labels. Now, retention labels, usually you come up with a label that is related to something. So I'm just going to pick on one that I've worked on recently, which is finance related information. So finance related information, typically you keep for 7 years. So you create a retention label called finance, and then any document that you apply that to, you can't delete for 7 years. And at the end of that 7-year period, there's a separate process outside of this controlled document system, which is handled by a product called Purview inside of Microsoft 365, which will then send that document for review. So yes, you can apply retention policies to this, but as part of kind of this controlled documents that we've built, it isn't necessarily built into the system. It's more, that's more of a SharePoint feature that you can apply over the top of it. Okay. Just gonna have a little look, see if you've got any more questions. Yeah, I think we've got one more here. Can existing archive documents be uploaded into SharePoint version history? Good question. And unfortunately, I say unfortunately, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, really. That no, you can't. And actually, you don't want to be able to upload documents with a kind of version history. SharePoint is very strict in the fact that when you upload a document into SharePoint, the version numbers start at 0.1 as its first kind of draft, and then it cycles through that numbering system. And the reason why it's really strict is because SharePoint wants to track and fully properly audit without any cheating from the document. It thinks it was born when it hits and it was uploaded or created inside of SharePoint, and it tracks everything after that. So you don't want to necessarily have, well, SharePoint doesn't want to have that. So it's quite reliable in that sense that you can't cheat the system. The only way you could potentially get it to a certain point, and I have seen this done, is that you could manually run the document through the approval process a couple of times to get it to a version number if you wanted to. To be honest, the amount of times we see people doing that is quite low, because what most people are happy with and what most auditors are happy with is that inside of the document itself, you have somewhere which basically says that this document is no longer under the control of a previous process. Whatever the previous kind of way that you were cycling these documents was, it stops at a certain date, and now it's into the new system. So inside of the document, you could say, this document was at version 4 when it transitioned into SharePoint, and it starts again at version 1 from this point onwards. And we tend to find that most auditors are happy with that as a solution, as a workaround. To also mention as well about some archiving, you can obviously delete and remove documents and things like that from SharePoint. You could also potentially have an archive by way of like a checkbox as well. So basically what we can do is we can hide documents from view if you click a little checkbox next to them, say this is an archive document, and then you can easily hide that then from the view of SharePoint. So you can have your kind of own archive in that kind of way, and you could easily bring them back by then, say, unchecking that box, and it reappears back into the view. Cool. So I'm just going to check if there's any final questions. Can't see any. If you're watching this, by the way, so this is recorded and it is going to be on our YouTube channel. So if you're watching it on YouTube and you do have any questions, then please feel free to drop those questions below. I can't see any more questions now coming through on our Q&A, so we'll look to wrap up. I just want to thank you for your time for joining today's session. If you would like, or if you've got any questions following on from this and you would like to have a one-to-one session to talk a bit more about how controlled documents could benefit you, then you can email us. So email hello@valto.co.uk, or you can go to our website, valto.co.uk/YouTube, and there's a nice form you can fill out there. Give us your contact details and we'll reach out to you, and we'll book in a free call just to talk a little bit more detail about this system, how it can benefit you. And yeah, we can go from there. So we'll wrap up now, but I just want to say again, thank you for joining, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.
Thanks, Dougie.